Hello and welcome, my name's Dawid and this is the channel where I do tech stuff. And this is probably the worst AMD APU build on YouTube. Now, the whole premise was pretty great. I thought I wanted to build a Mac Pro trashcan PC, but you know, for people with an actual sense of value for money. But as you'll see over the course of the video, it didn't go very well. Anyway, let's kick things off with a nice and tasty build montage, but before that, okay, so let's stop the montage there for a little and have a look what the inside of this case looks like. So over here we have the tray which the motherboard is mounted on, right in the middle of the case, and because of that power plug there, I assume the power supply gets mounted above that. And then in the roof we have a fan over there, and we've got one in the basement, but I'm going to be replacing them with these, an RGB one in the bottom and just a powerful one in the top. This is the back of that plate I showed you earlier, and this is where you mount the storage devices. So you can mount an SSD or even a 3.5-inch hard drive. So that's not too bad, and it also gets airflow from the fan down here. What's actually pretty cool about the case is that you can get the whole motherboard assembly out. And then you have it separately here, and you can install the motherboard and the power supply on that bracket, and then put it back in. Although I can imagine that putting it back in is going to be a little bit of a nightmare. So this is the configuration that goes into the case. And as you can see, it's pretty tight. Here is the, let me just see if I can balance this. Here, the power supply is actually resting on the CPU cooler at the moment, which does not seem ideal for airflow. But I'm guessing when it's hanging, you'll have about that much clearance between the power supply and the fan of the CPU cooler. At least you can orient it in a way that the fan of the power supply isn't sucking in the heat straight from the CPU cooler, because that would have been pretty ridiculous. And then on the bottom here is the SSD. So that's the whole PC pretty much in that little space. I'm gonna have to fit it in there somehow. So I think I've pretty much finished it. Cable management is not the most effective thing in this case. You pretty much just have to stuff all the crap in wherever you can get it. The whole power supply fan, CPU fan situation is obviously amazing. Look at that. If that's not a choked fan, I don't think I've ever seen one. Now moving around to the back where we've got the SSD and a bunch of cables here. Now, the cable management situation here isn't too terrible because you've got a bunch of tie-down points, which is quite nice. Although my biggest issue is this Corsair fan, because the controller that it comes with doesn't actually have USB connectivity. I can't plug it into the motherboard. So I have this controller thing that I have to deal with somehow. And I'm not going to be able to have it on the front of the case because that just is stupid. So I don't really know what Corsair was thinking, making it not so that you can plug it into the actual motherboard. So let's have a quick look at what the cable management looked like with this ridiculous fan implementation from Corsair. And as you can see, cable management is a bit of a mess, and both the fans were really noisy. Neither of them were PWM, and I only had one low power fan connector thing, so I couldn't quiet them down. And with that, I decided to box them up and send them back to Amazon, and bought two Noctua NF F12 fans instead, because you can't see into the case and they're like the best fans ever, except for the fact that they look like something pooed them out. And as you can see, with the new fans in, the cable management is significantly better. And again, you can't see the fans and it's great. When I started up the PC, it was all quiet and everything was lovely. Just on a quick note after the build was finished about build quality. This case is built terribly. It's the kind of case where you kind of look at it slightly wrong and paint starts falling off. It's built so badly that it can't properly survive the process of having a PC built in it. And that kind of seems to defeat the purpose slightly. After just building in it once, it looked like it's been around the block, and a really rough block at that, a couple times. Now with the build process finished, let's have a quick look at what the assembled computer looks like. I actually think it looks really cool. It's a nice color that kind of makes it stand out a bit, and it's a nice size for your desk as well. It is really unfortunate that it doesn't support a GPU because, well, once the APU gets a bit long in the tooth, you can't really plug anything new in there. And the whole kind of PSU placement is terrible as well, and we'll see that it leads to some pretty terrifying things later down the line. But if it was built better and the insides were laid out in a more effective manner, it would be a really awesome case. But on that note, I think we can move to the benchmarking process, which is going to be a little bit different from normal, because from the moment I started benchmarking it, I started noticing really weird behavior with the PC. The first game I tried to go with was CSGO because, well, it's really easy to run. And it did run fairly well, except for the terrible frame drops. And this is where I started being really concerned, because it would run at like 90 frames per second for about a minute, and then the frame rate would drop to like 1 or 2 frames per second for a couple seconds, which would pretty much render the game unplayable. And usually it decided to have the frames drop mid-gunfight, which always led to you being killed. Then I decided to try Fortnight, which did the exact same thing. And then moved over to Dota 2. Dota 2 did less of that behavior. It didn't do that. Dota 2 actually ran really well. You can run it up to 1440p at like high settings and it still could take it, but it's a not very demanding game. And then I was like, okay, let's see if PUBG works, and PUBG did the exact same thing with the frame drops. And then my first thought process was, this feels like a lack of RAM frame drop. This feels like a buffer that's been filled that needs to be replaced. And then I was like, okay, let me test this out. I took the 8 gigs of RAM out, which I had to get 8 gigs because otherwise the PC would become too expensive. And then I put 16 gigs inside from another system. It made no difference at all. Then I couldn't figure it out. At this point, I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. It probably should have made sense. And it was at this point that I got the Riviera tuner going in MSI Afterburner, which meant I could have a closer look at what the PC was doing while the frames were dropping in the way that it did. Because before then, I was using Adrenaline software from AMD's monitoring software, and that's not very useful because it doesn't really give you CPU core speeds and GPU core speeds. but Riviera Tuner does do this. So I had a look and there was a huge drop in CPU speed and GPU speed every time there was this huge frame rate dip. So the PC was obviously throttling. And the way that I decided to make sure that this was actually the issue was by forcing a clock speed. So by overclocking the CPU to 3.75 gigahertz and the GPU to like 12,050 megahertz. This meant that the frame rate drops didn't happen anymore, but then after 5 minutes of gaming the PC crashed and death happened. So obviously the PC can't maintain a gaming load. And the thing is, even when you're on the desktop, it's sitting at like 65 degrees Celsius. And that kind of brings me to the conclusion. I'm not going to do any further benchmarks because the case is so strangled by the thermal limitations of the case that there isn't really much point in doing that because, well, you're not really seeing what the machine can actually do. It's quite ironic that this case is the shape of a trash can because it's kind of garbage. It's built really badly with paint coming off everywhere, and it can't fulfill its basic use as a case because, well, everything just catches on fire inside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to package it up in the same way that I packaged up the 2 terrible fans that I had earlier, send it back to Amazon and get a better case to build this machine in so that we can see what it can actually do. So yes, there's another video build log thing from me that's going to have a part 2, but this time the part 2 is going to basically have a different PC in it. I think I'm going to go with the Node 202 by Fractal Design. Let me know in the comment section below which case you think I should replace it with, because yeah, it's disappointing that this thing doesn't work out because I really like the idea behind it. Although if I have a different ITX build case for it, it means that it will have future expandability so that I can put a GPU in at some point when, you know, like I said before, the internal GPU gets long in the tooth. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this kind of fairly pointless video again. If you liked the video, do like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Share it with your friends if you think they'd enjoy watching a trash can garbage PC. And with that, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.